and to be a part of that when we launched the Mars Perseverance rover last month. I think it was last month, maybe it was the end of the month, end of July. We got to watch that on the company intranet, which was, I felt like I had a little part of that. So thank you guys for inviting me today. I wanted to talk about, as Lade said, I wanted to talk about quantifying qualitative decisions, because one of the hardest things that we do in both work and our personal lives is making decisions. So actually, I realized I should probably turn on my presentation. So let me do that now. There it is. Allow that. Okay. So I'm hoping that you can see the presentation there.
Yes.
Excellent. And I'll totally share these slides with you all afterwards so that you can have them. But in March of 2018, Kim Goodwin gave a talk at the Information Architecture Conference in Orlando, Florida. And she talked about how user experiences are made of decisions. It was a keynote speech, and while it was very inspirational and really made us stop and think about sort of how decisions drive a lot of the stuff that we see today, there wasn't really a lot of guidance given on how to arrive at good decisions. And I'm a woman of action, and I like to provide kind of practical hands-on stuff. So I was super excited when she gave this talk, because I had this talk queued up for first thing the next morning in the conference program. So this is a way really of prioritizing the values that we're not willing to sacrifice to drive good decision making. So making decisions is really hard, right? We've all been there. You have multiple stakeholders, you have diverging goals, you have varying measures of success. You have politics that are fraught with all kinds of peril. There's all those moving parts and all the silos, and you don't know whether you're what are the points of comparison between the things that you're deciding between, right? Is it apples? Is it chainsaws? Sometimes the criteria for what a successful decision looks like is unclear. And there's big consequences from a lot of these decisions, and they're consequences that endure. They endure and endure, right? Quantitative decisions are super easy, right? You can say 40% of my users aren't coming back from time travels. We need to do something, right? Qualitative decisions, though, those are especially hard. What should we do and why? All of those moving parts come into play. And really, the qualitative decisions are the ones that are the big, hard life and business decisions. Where should we dedicate resources? Which candidate should we prioritize? Which feature in our app or our site should we prioritize? Which job or college or apartment should I choose, right? There are a lot of factors at play, right? And some of these factors are more important than others. Often the decisions involve and impact a lot of people, and some of those people are more important than others, right? And what I find is there's a lot of lip service given to transparency and participatory design. But in the end, the decisions often feel like they were just made, and really, often they were just made by somebody based on their gut or some criterion that isn't clear to everybody, right? I have a lot of experience in big bureaucracies, both in higher ed. I've worked for the Italian government. I'm now working for the federal government in NASA. Decisions made on high tend to ripple down, right? And often it doesn't seem right, or it doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem understandable, and often they aren't, right? So what would a good decision look like? A good decision would allow multiple stakeholders to identify what's important to them, and it would prioritize the things that are more important than others. It would be fair, it would be transparent, it would be inclusive, it would be adaptable across industries and practices and levels of experience, right? It would be scalable. You could do it locally, or you could do it in a geographically dispersed approach. It would work for an individual. It would work for a small group. It would work for large groups. It would leave an artifact that could be shared and understood. So all of those kind of rolled up comes down to just kind of a few key things. Good decisions are transparent. They're value driven. That is, they're based in things that we hold as we agree are important. They're consensual. Everyone participates. Everyone agrees. They're participatory, which again is sort of rolls back up to the consensual aspect of things. And they're documented, because the business, no matter what the decision is that we make, the business always wants to know, what did we base that decision in? So it could be a process that leaves you some kind of document that shows what the decision was based in, right? So in doing this work and developing this framework, I started with an article by Adam Polanski, published in 2007 in Boxes and Arrows, which is a website with a bunch of really great publications. Even today, it was started in the early aughts, and has Christina Wadke has maintained the repository for 20 years. And it still today has a lot of really good information in it, especially kind of foundational work. A lot of these articles were contributed when we were just figuring out what user experience design is and was. So Adam Polanski contributed an article called Faceted Feature Value Analysis, and there's a link to it on the closing slide of this presentation. And he actually based his work, he had kind of mashed it up with some classic software techniques. I took his work and kind of mashed it up a little bit with Kanban and some other facilitation techniques. And I will say, my framework, it's not perfect, but it's a good place to start. And a number of people I know have worked with have used it with success. It allows you to work with stakeholders to identify the qualities of a good solution, prioritize those qualities according to their importance to the project's success, and then to evaluate each solution against these criteria. So there's the outcome of it is a list of options that are ranked in order of the value to the business, with a numerical value applied to each. And I call this quantifying qualitative decisions. So let's jump into sort of what the process looks like. This is your money slide. Those of you who are playing at home can take a screenshot of this one. This one really sums it all up. The stuff after this, I'm going to talk about sort of the step-by-step specific of walking you through it, and then talk about some individual case studies and instances where I've used it with varying degrees of success. So you start with the goals of the project, right? You want to take it, sometimes you may need to take it all the way back to the goals of the institution, but what problem does this decision solve, right? So once you've sort of identified what your key problem is and mapped it back to the goals, then you can identify the qualities of a successful outcome or an ideal choice. And then you prioritize those qualities according to their importance or their impact. And some qualities, what you find is they're more important than others. I give you an example sort of from a life decision, buying a house, right? If we're talking about what's important to me, it needs to be in a good school district. It needs to be in a safe neighborhood. It needs to have easy access to a train station, because we have trains in LA now, hooray. We need to have parking spaces for 2 cars. We need to have 2 bedrooms. I like a house that has a lot of light.
However, hi,
yeah.
Lynn. We're still on the intro slide.
Oh no, that is very weird. Let me go back to that. That's very strange. Let me try it again. Present now. let's see. Thank you. How about that? Can you see the new one now?
Yes.
Okay. That is very strange. All right, I'm just gonna show you all of the things, because it doesn't seem to be advancing when I advance the slides. We'll give that a try, right? So you identify the quality of a successful outcome, you prioritize those qualities. So I had sort of talked about what my priorities would be for a house, but for instance, for my 17-year-old son, he wants something that's near the beach. He wants something that's near his friend's house. He wants a cool bedroom. He also wants it to be near the train station, and he also wants it to have 2 bedrooms, right? So each stakeholder prioritizes the importance of each quality to a successful outcome. And then and I'll walk you guys through this. It sounds very abstract when I'm talking about it, but we'll walk through it, right? So once the qualities are identified and prioritized, then you use the qualities as a rubric for scoring your candidates. So once you have scored each candidate on each quality, then you multiply them by the aggregated weight for that quality to get weighted scores for each quality for each candidate. And then you sum each candidate's weighted scores for a total candidate score, and the higher score is better. So let's see, an example. So I'm going to walk you through an example. I'm going to lay out the premise, and I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for real life. And the example that we're going to use is choosing between 2 candidates for a job position, right? So can y'all see this new slide, identify the qualities?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So as a group, ideally before the interviews, when you're bringing these candidates in, you'll make a list of all the qualities of a good candidate for this position, right? These qualities are independent of the candidates themselves. These are sort of the ideal candidate would be able to meet these needs. So you want to frame them positively this is an important aspect. Spend 5 to 10 minutes generating the qualities as a group. And then you spend 5 to 10 minutes reviewing the list, refining them, combining them. Maybe you'll need to split some out. There's no maximum or minimum. You may also find yourself sort of as you go through the process, adding qualities that you missed, or deleting qualities that seem redundant, or even splitting some out to get further clarity. It's kind of flexible that way. It's not really a fixed thing. You'll want to try and keep them evenly distributed across topics or business areas, so that there's not, for instance, strong representation or heavy representation of, for instance, developer concerns in a question that's user experience. You just really kind of want to make sure that there's a good distribution of qualities. So in this case, for the qualities of a good candidate, we've identified that they're presentable to the customer, that they have strong and clear deliverables, that they have good communication skills, they have a clear process for problem solving, and that they're a good fit with the team, right? This is just fictional. If I were doing this for real, some of these would be a little more granular, right? Strong and clear deliverables is kind of, it's big and broad, so we could probably narrow that down. But for the sake of this exercise, we're just going to run with it. So what we do is, let's say there are 4 people who are participating in this decision. So each of those 4 people, we go through the metrics, and each participant says how important each one of those qualities is to a successful outcome. You use the grading scale 0, 1, and 2, and I'll talk about why later. I get a lot of pushback on this, but I'll talk about why we just use the 0, 1, 2 later. So you can think of it as not important, nice to have, must have, or not important at all to very important, right? Or not at all, a little bit, or some, a lot, right? So 0, 1, 2 is kind of the rubric. So each person gives it a score, a weight, right? And then you aggregate those weights. So in our example, for the first quality, presentable to the customer, 3 of our committee members said that this was a must-have. They scored it 2. And one person said that it was just a nice to have, right? So the total weight for that quality is 7. And if you carry that down, right, you get a weight of 6 and 6 for communication skills and deliverables. You get a weighting of 5 for process, and you get a weighting of 8 for fit with the team, right? So then once you have assigned the weights for the qualities, then you have your interviews with your candidates and you ask questions that ideally will elicit enough information about these qualities that you can then make decisions about them. So you reconvene the committee, right? And each participant, each person on the committee scores each candidate for each quality. So let's say that if we're looking at candidate 1, right? They scored, again, you use the same 0, 1, 2 scale. 0 is this candidate doesn't have this quality at all. 2 is that this candidate meets this criterion without a doubt, right? So each participant on the committee scores each candidate on each quality, and then those raw scores are summed. So let's say candidate 1 turned out okay in terms of presentable to the customer, right? Got 3 points on that one. Candidate 1, however, had really good deliverables, right? And was so-so on communication skills, so-so on having a clear process, did better as a fit with the team. Candidate 2 had very strong, presentable to the customer skills, was so-so on their deliverables, clear and strong. Their communication skills seemed to be pretty good. They had a clear process for problem solving, and they were a decent fit with the team kind of across the board, right? So once you have the raw score, you add those up. That's, wait a minute. Sorry, I skipped a page. Then once you've got those scores, then you weight them. You weight the candidates' scores. So this is the math magical part, right? For each quality, then you multiply the candidate's aggregated raw score times the weight. So candidate 1 scored a 3 on presentable to the customer, but that is pretty important. So it has 7 points. So they scored 21 points. You do that all the way down the row and across, or all the way down the column for each candidate and for each quality, right? And then you have a weighted score for each quality, and you can tally them and compare. And at this point, it becomes very clear that candidate 2 should be the one that gets the position. They scored 152 compared to 131. So what this does is, by weighting the qualities that are more important, it gives them more importance in the final tallying. So let's talk about some tips and techniques, right? Some success tips. One of the things that you need to do is you need to have the right people in the room making the decision, right? They need to be a broad distribution of interested parties and interested groups. They need to be sufficiently empowered to be able to make these decisions. They need to be prepared and informed. Another success tip is to keep the scoring visible. We typically in the past have done this using a Google Sheet that we projected at the front of the room, or we shared in a window with the participants so that everyone could see. It's important to keep the qualities phrased positively. That way all of the scoring goes in the same direction. And to keep them very distinct. But it's important to get them as granular as you need them. So that one, for instance, where we talked about deliverables, it could have been a lot more granular. We could have talked about the kinds of deliverables that we needed, or expertise with a certain tool, or their ability to sort of go from one kind of deliverable to another, right? With just a few participants, it's okay to get real granular. But the more participants you have, you want to keep the qualities to a manageable number, because this is a matrixed method. And so what you end up with is every time you add a quality, you have to make those decisions across all of those candidates, right? So it's a geometric increase in the number of decisions, which is a nice transition to the question of why do I only use a 0, 1, 2 scale? So I get a lot of pushback on this. People come to me and they're like, oh, 0, 1, 2. No, we need 1 to 5. We need 5 points on this scale. And I'm going to say that the simplicity of this, the success of this method, right, it comes in its simplicity. So 0, 1, 2 allows a participant to say this quality has no importance, right? How many Amazon reviews have you read where it says, I would give this product 0 stars, but Amazon won't let me do that, right? So this allows you to give a quality 0 stars. It reduces your decision fatigue. Really, what's the difference between a 3 and a 4, between a 4 and a 5, right? It's a lot of cognitive friction. And 0, 1, 2, it's quick, it's an easy decision, it forces a commit, right? It reduces your decision fatigue. And then there's sort of the statistical aspect of it. Statistically, the mean and the median of this range are the same, which gives you more easily interpretable information. It reduces the time you spend arguing about the actions to take on a 3, a 3 versus a 4 on a 5-point scale. And the other thing I would say is a 5-point scale, a 1 to 5 point scale, skews towards 5. Inevitably, you'll get somebody who wants to average the outcomes, and the average of a 1 to 5 point scale is 2.5, whereas in the median is a 3. So this is a little more statistically valid. You can use this tool alone. I have used it by myself. My daughter has used it by herself to choose colleges. I've used it to choose between job offerings, right? You can, the perils of using it alone is knowing when you're done generating the qualities, right? And clearly, if you're using it alone, you don't use 0 on the qualities. Because if a quality is not important to you, then you needn't include it in your decision-making process. You can use it in small groups. At the University of Southern California, where I worked, we implemented an HR software package called Workday across the entire campus. The Workday team spent 9 months doing interviews and analysis of the experience of the users, what people needed, what they wanted, what was missing, how they needed to use the tool, how they needed the tool configured. And the Workday group identified 16 different distinct enhancement projects that they could roll out over the next 3 to 5 years. But they needed prioritization and focus to dedicate resources. They couldn't do all 16 of them. So they had a small group of high-powered senior leaders who were the decision makers in this process. And it was politically fraught. Some of these folks had been involved in political death matches with each other for decades. We had the head of university human resources. We had the head of hospital human resources, because USC they own 3 hospitals in addition to a whole university. We had the head of IT business systems. We had the chair of the faculty senate. And as I said, there were some sworn enemies in these groups, people who couldn't decide anything together because they just couldn't agree on anything. So we used this method, this technique. We made them little auction paddles, little signs that said 0, 1, 2 on popsicle sticks, so that they wouldn't be everyone could vote at the same time and they wouldn't be influenced by each other's votes. And it reduced the political infighting as well. We seeded, we seeded the qualities before the meeting, in that we had a sense of some of the things that were important to them. So we were able to come up with 10 qualities before the meeting, and then we showed them to them and allowed them to revise them, make decisions. The revisions were very minor. We solicited their input, and then we captured the outcomes manually using a pre-coded Google Sheet that we projected so that everyone could see how folks had voted and what the scoring and weighting process was. We've also done it with pencil and paper in small groups, right? Here's the best thing. That group of 5 people arrived at a decision in which they ranked these 16 enhancement projects. They prioritized them according to these priorities. And they were happy with the process and the outcome. And they asked us to do the same process with the Campus Advisory Council, which consisted of 50 people across 2 campuses. And they wanted us to do it in 2 weeks in a single meeting. Which brings me to this next slide. You can do it in large groups. In this case, we used their same qualities. We sent a survey before the meeting to ask the council members to weight the qualities and soliciting additional qualities. So we just used a Google form, and we put the qualities in the form, and we asked them to say, not important, somewhat important, very important. So we did that part of the quality of the weighting ahead of the meeting. We then we distributed descriptions of the projects prior to the meeting so that everybody knew what they were evaluating. They were able to read up on the descriptions. And then we convened the meeting. And at University of Southern California, we had this classroom technology called clickers. And it's just a tool that they use in big classes, sometimes for voting, sometimes for quiz taking, sometimes for polling. And so we had a bunch of these sitting around the university, and we used them. There are a bunch of different ways that you could do this. Again, we could do it with a Google group, and people could, a Google form, and people could enter their score using their phones. We didn't want to rely on personal software for this project, so we distributed clickers for everybody. We did a quick little demonstration and clicker test, right, to show that their clicker was working, and an explanation of the process. And we projected the tallies up on a video screen. And the outcome was very much aligned with the leadership's decision 2 weeks earlier, right? And we had immediate results. So folks were really happy with that outcome. And the university had direction on how to dedicate their resources. And it was achieved transparently and consensually, in the sense that everybody who needed a voice in the decision got a fair and equally weighted voice, right? You can use it in a non-binding way. Let me share an example with you about this. Again, at the University of Southern California, I worked in a large central IT group, and we learned at one of our semi-annual all-hands meetings, we learned that we needed to have an app in the App Store. So the next week, there was a meeting of people that were interested in working on the app in the App Store project, and it was 11 developers and me, and I was the sole user experience designer. So the developers wanted very much to decide what platform we should build the app in. And I was advocating for a long time about, hey, maybe we should decide what the app's going to do, because there wasn't no instruction on that. We had to decide that. Maybe we should decide what the app is going to do before we decide what platform to build it in. But they're developers, and they were pretty bent on figuring out the platform. So we had 6 90-minute meetings in which we respectfully discussed with each other all the different pros and cons of platforms, but no decisions were made. So after the 6th meeting, I went to the lead developer and said, hey, I have this method, rolled it out for him, walked him through it, said, hey, can we use it? And he said, yeah, sure, let's do that. Maybe if we can get to a decision. So we identified as a group all of the different qualities that a good platform for building an app would have. And then we weighted those qualities as a group. Each one of us individually, and then we aggregated those qualities. And then we looked at the different candidates and scored each candidate against each quality, weighted those scores, and did the evaluation. And the outcome was a platform. We chose a platform. It was great. Then we went, identified the business requirements for the app, figured out what the app was going to do, how we were going to build it. It turned out that the platform that we had chosen wasn't really the right platform for that. But it was very clear what the platform should be. So we just discarded that decision and revisited the original choice of platform, chose one that was appropriate for the project. So you might say, oh, so it was a waste of time, but it wasn't a waste of time because they were completely blocked. They could not move forward on the project until they had made this decision, never mind that they didn't have the information to make the decision. So by moving them through that decision process, we were able to get to the part of the project where we were able to make a good and informed decision, right? And we got past the sticking point and we delivered the app on time. So you can use it in a non-binding. I mean, one of my friends said, I used your method to choose between two jobs. And after I'd worked my way through the process, I realized that I wanted the other job. And I said, that's good information too, right? You don't have to go through the process and adhere to that decision. The process is about surfacing what's important. So using it in a non-binding way is a perfectly acceptable way to get through it, right? It's just a tool. So, but I want to come back to Kim's talk about user experience being made of decisions, right? And how we need to hold to things that are important when we're making these decisions. So I want to talk about a hard decision that I made with two other people during a very fraught time with multiple stakeholders, right? My daughter was 13 years old and I had just separated from her father, and she had been invited to apply to the Lycée Français in Los Angeles. And our original plan was that she would go to the local high school. So in order to sort of get through this challenging decision, I suggested that we use this method. And so we all sat down at a table and between the three of us, we generated 50 different qualities of what the high school experience, what a successful high school experience looks like. We included her in the process, and in terms of generating and weighting the qualities and evaluating the candidates. And the final score, the decision was strongly in favor of not the Lycée Français, but to going to the local public high school. But she was at peace with that decision. And that's because she participated in the decision as an equal. And she could see that the decision was not based on a single criterion, right? We can't afford it, or it's too far. But she could see all of the things, all of the factors that went into that decision, and the process was clear to her, right? We hear a lot of talk about being more ethical in our practice, right? But we're not really given ways to do that. There's that age-old ethical guideline. If you read about it on the front page of the New York Times and your name was attached to it, how would you feel? But that doesn't really, it's harder to parse that out when you're talking about making decisions for the business or for a home, right? So I'm hoping that this tool can facilitate effective participatory and transparent decision-making in your environments, right? I'm still working on ways to improve it. If you use it and have feedback, I would love to hear that. Feel free to reach out to me. These are links, and like I said, I'll share these slides with y'all so that you can get at them. These are the links, and then this is how to get in touch with me. And I would love to hear what questions you might have.
Thanks, Lynn. So I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay. Let me stop the presenting and I'll share my face.